and delete. Now, there's a few others that you probably won't be interacting with directly very often, so we're just going to focus on these first four. So essentially what the method is doing is telling the server what kind of request you're making, or maybe a better way to say it is what your intention with that request is. For example, when I send a GET request or a request with a method, let's go ahead and start our blog space project. Now, I'm starting from essentially absolute beginning. This is just kind of the default stuff that Scrimba includes. You'll see I even deleted any of the default CSS and there's no JavaScript at all. And there's a few different ways that I tend to approach a new project like this. Sometimes I will focus on the front end and put a bunch of sort of dummy data in just to be able to get the styling all set up and everything. I think this time around what I want to do is start actually from the JavaScript and get my data first. So I will go over to index.js and write out a challenge for you to get started. Okay, this won't be too unfiltered. API sends back.
Alright, so get a list of blog posts from the JSON API holders. So pretty much fetch the URL, and then we have the post, and then maybe we need to get a method. Going to be a get. Then that then responds this respond.json. Then we go to then data console.log data. Okay, get a bunch of it since there's so many posts. Let limit array to just 5. So let's do a for loop for let I equal 0. And do I less than or equal to how many? There's so many of them. Let's do data dot map post. Is it post dot map method? and then a function. Plus 5 object. Let's see what I do. Slice. Data.slice. Okay. Oh, he said use dot slice as well. Dot slice, and then boom, 0 to 5.
Everything. So I think there's like 100 or 200 blog objects that come back, or blog post objects that come back. And since there's so many of them, let's just limit the array to the first 5. That way our page is able to find all of the posts back. There that there's 100 items in objects at indices 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that makes 5 total. Let's just make sure that's right, and we'll console log the posts array, and then I'll get rid of this console log, and we will start putting some elements on our screen. Now that we've got the first 5 posts, let's actually display them over on our little browser. So your challenge is to take those first 5 blog post objects, display the title and body properties. You are welcome to add a little bit of styling if you want. I've got some hints that will help you along in the process if you need it.
Okay, pretty easy. Didn't hear anything. So many cost scam in here. Just ridiculous. Okay, so we go back here. Let's do diff class /diff create HTML file to store this item. So let's call this post containers. Copy this. Let's go on to here. Let's do document dot get element by ID. Post containers. So here let's do const post post HTML. That's the post. Alright, so we do post inner HTML equal to a template string. It's going to be post array. Alright. Do h1. So let's see. Alright, so we'll do h1. Let's just call this h1. I need to look back at the cannot set property of no to cons post. What? Okay, so what can I do here? Is this? Let's try and do this. Oh, it's an ID. Okay, let's do h1. Need to see ID1. So the title here is going to be post array title. Post array title. Post array title. So here, go in the first item. So nope. Go into post array and go into title. Post array, then title. Loop over the item. So we need to loop over the item. Let's do post cons post equal document dot get element by ID post containers. And what we need to do is post array dot map map okay, so we do post let's do for loops, right? For let I equal 0, I less than or equal to post array length I plus plus. Okay. Post. Hmm. Okay. Then we do P and slash P. This is on the body, so basically the same things. Copy, paste, body. Boom. Bada bing. So we got out of post. That's pretty much it. So there's one. What does it say? Slice or slice. There's like 1 pose, 2 pose, 3 pose, 4 pose, right?
Pause here and work on this challenge.
Maybe we do an H3 instead of H1. So this can be easy to see. Yes.
Start. If it's been a while since you've dealt with DOM manipulation involving for loops and arrays, spend as much time with this as you need. Go over it again, watch me do it again, delete everything, try to do it again from scratch, or maybe even just delete small portions of it like this for loop. Really do everything you can to internalize this. I'm sure you're tired of me harping on practice and getting your hands on the keyboard, but really the worst thing you could do for your coding education is just watch and watch and watch and never do. So once you feel pretty comfortable with this, let's keep going forward with our blog space project.
That's good.
I think it's really important for us to have these CSS challenges every now and then, just so that we keep the ball rolling with CSS. We don't forget everything that we learned. So your challenge is to add a little bit of style. Primarily, you're going to add a little fixed nav bar at the top. That may introduce a couple challenges with spacing that you'll likely want to figure out how to fix. You're obviously welcome to go above and beyond if you'd like. I'm going to keep my styles pretty simple and we'll solve any issues that we come across together. I haven't pre-written this CSS anywhere, so this will be, in a sense, me live coding and solving any issues that we face together. Pause here and start adding some style to the blog space project.
So fix nav bar. Let's do nav. Headers slash headers. And then we do nav. Say here block space. Okay. Just do an H1. Or maybe we do like a yeah, H3, H1. Call this class logo. Then we go here. This long body should be margin 0. I like the margin here. Padding's alright. Doesn't need anything. Probably to go to the logo and then FS 30 pixels. 30 pixel. To pad top your content so it doesn't get hidden behind the nav bar. Fix nav bar at the top. UL Okay, let's just move on, right? Does it matter much?
It's also default. I think it's marketing. Let's give it a shot. I just
Yeah.
stopped to add a new blog post to our list of blogs that we're not working
Move
with
on.
something so crazy that just is a bunch of titles and post bodies. So, okay, that's enough for now. Let's keep moving forward. The next feature we want to add to Blogspace is a form that will allow us to add a new blog to our list. So that's your challenge. You're going to create a form that has two inputs with associated labels. One input will be for the post title, which would just be an input type text, and another input for the post body, which I would make a text area element. Lastly, you'll add a button to the form. You're not going to worry about styling or any JavaScript right now. Pause here and work on this challenge.
Okay, so create a form with two inputs. Wait, what? Where's my Visual Studio Code? Okay, but let's go with this. Create two input with two input, each with an associated label. One for the post title and one for post. So let's do input. Slash input. So we do type, text, then we do placeholders, your title here. Okay, what is it? So text areas, this is text area. Text area. Okay, nice. Input. A form with two input, each with an associated labels. Is hide behind the nav, and one of the posts, then add buttons to submit the form. So we have buttons, buttons slash buttons. ID submit btn post. Alright, so label. This is going to be title. Okay. And then description. Okay. Description. Then form. Margin top. So this has a padding of 30. So let's do 30 pixel. Oopsie doopsie. How do I make it? So it's right here, right? one for the post, a text input, and one for the post body. Then add button to the form. Don't worry about styling yet. Yeah, pretty much it. Don't really need to worry about the styling yet.
Okay, that one we will have a text. Then for that, probably just says post. Let's hit save just to see where we are. And well, it looks like it's popping behind our fixed nav bar there. So I think what I'll do is go into my CSS. I know I said we're not doing any styling, but I want to at least be able to see my form here.
Okay, so what did he do? So he has a padding, position fixed. That's a padding. Maybe we need to add a margin bottom. Not sure. Not too sure about it. Maybe a margin bottom. 30 pixel. Would it works? Nope.
And we'll select the form and let's just give it a padding top.
Oh, padding. Padding. Top 30 pixel. Maybe we need to double that. 60 pixel. There we go.
Top. Let's see, our blog list has a padding set to 30, 10, 10. Why don't we just move this down and see if that kind of works? Maybe 30 is not quite enough. And yeah, 60 is working better. I can see my elements, and this is perfectly fine. In fact,
Say your title here, both of them.
to do that, I need to
Doesn't matter.
associate them somehow. The way I can do that is to give an ID to my input in my text area. This is going to be my post title. Here in the text area, we'll give an ID of post body. And then to associate my label with my input, I will use the for attribute and say this is for the element with the ID of post title. And this label is for the element with the ID of post body. I believe this has some benefits with accessibility. It also makes it a little more usable where if I click the title, it will automatically, let me refresh this. If I click the title, it'll automatically focus into my input there. If I click body, it'll automatically focus into the input or the text area there. Okay, awesome work. Hopefully that wasn't too challenging. The next thing we're going to do is to add a little bit of styling to our form so it's a little more presentable.
Fun.
And we'll do that in the next screencast.
Fun. Block space.
Okay, so our form is obviously struggling a little bit with these default styling. So let's go ahead and improve the form's visibility or improve the form style a little bit. The challenge is just written here, so go ahead, read through the challenge, pause the screencast, and try to add a little bit of style to our form. Well,
add some background color to separate it from the post. Style the buttons however you liked it. Well, let him
the first
style
thing
it.
that's pretty glaring and obvious is the layout. And I think what I'm going to...
This should go top of this. Body go top. And then post maybe stay right here or in the middle. Or on the right. I like it on the left. Not too sure.
Is put it into display grid. And well, you know what? This alone seems to have basically fixed it. Overwhelming how wide it is, and we would need to fix it. For now, this is going to be fine. I think like light blue area, I'll give those a little bit of bottom mark. Same spacing to the text area, maybe 10 pixels there. Okay, that's already a lot better. It makes the button a little more present. The font looks a little bit small, so I might change the font size to something like 20 pixels, maybe 18 pixels. Okay. And one thing I always like to do with my buttons is to change the cursor to be the pointer style. Now I think in Scrimba you just see kind of the little blue arrow. If you click the refresh button over here, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's the little Mickey Mouse hand as you hover over the button. It just makes it a lot more obvious that it's a button that's meant to be clicked. We could probably go through and add a different border or height around the inputs or the text area. I'm not going to worry too much about it. Hopefully you had a chance to play around with that. But for now, at least this form isn't quite so difficult to look at. I'm gonna raise this up just a little bit so we can start to see the difference in our post body down there. And awesome. Okay, that's all the styling we're gonna deal with right now for the form. The next thing to do is to start hooking up this form and making it so that you can actually fill something in and hit the post button. And that's the challenge we're gonna tackle next.
Form submit at the vendor finish.
In this challenge, what we're
So
preparing
basically the
ourselves to
submit
do is
buttons, pretty much explainable. You type in the title, body, just like your Facebook. Type post, click post in order to post. And then this title and body is going to shove into here. Then it add to your API by using, I think, a post request.
is to take information that is input by the user in our two input fields here and to send it off to a server. So the first thing we need to do is listen for the submit event on the form, which in our case will happen when the button is clicked, and that's because our button is inside of our form element. And your task is then to take the values that are input in the title and the body inputs and combine them into an object. Like it says, that object will have a title property and a body property. And then for now, just log that object to the console. Pause here and work.
Listen for the submit event on the form, which will happen when the button is clicked. Don't forget to prevent default on form so it doesn't refresh your page. Google form. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, combine the title value and body value into an object with a title property and body property. Log out the object to the console. So let's do submit. Submit tn. Okay. Document.get element by id. Submit btn. Then we do add event listeners. We do click. And then we do a function. What else do we need? Oh. Listen to the form. Listen event on the form, which will happen when the button is clicked. Don't forget to prevent default. Prevent default. Form. Prevent default method of the event interface tell the user agent that if the event does not get an explicit handle, a default action should not be taken as it normally would be. Right. Event. just this, and then we do console.log, check out that the low is good. Listen to the submit button. Don't forget to prevent default on the form so it doesn't refresh your page. So basically just that. Event prevent default. Clicking on a link prevent. Don't really know. Of the object to the console, combine the title value and body value into an object. Right, const post content so how to create object. Now I want to add. Okay, so we have like two empty const post title array equal empty into an object, right? Post array as an empty object, right? And then so when people click submit, push it into here. Post array dot push. Push the post title. Oh, dot value. Console.log. Post array. Okay. What if I add another one? Still doesn't remember. What did I do here? Submit. Form title. That's good. Prevent default. Ah. Okay. That's data. Let's post let post equal to this. Then we do title. Post title dot value. That here going to be body. Post body dot value. Okay. Console.log post. Not bad, not bad.
Work on the challenge. I've easily select it, so I can say document.getElementById by ID new. Actually, function page when it's creative title. And then I'm just going to grab the value from that input box. Do the same thing for you put those into an object to get property. So I'll say the title is the post title that we got above, and the body is the post body that we got above. And for good measure, it says to, and awesome. We got our object with a title property and a body property. Nice work. When you're ready, let's keep moving forward. We're getting closer to actually sending this to the API. Here we are back looking at our components of a request, and the next thing we're going to talk about is the request body. Now the request body is simply the data that we want to send to the server. So what I want you to do is to think about the methods that we have. We have a get method, post, put, and delete methods. If the body is the data that we're sending to the server, which of these methods do you think we will want to include a body with? In fact, if you need to, you can pause here just to give yourself a little more time to think about it. Well, with a GET request, we aren't sending anything to the server. We're asking the server to send us something. And it's something similar with a delete request. We're not sending data to the server. We're just sending a signal to the server telling it to delete something for us. However, with a post and a put request, we are sending data to the server. So with the request body, we're actually only going to be including it when we have a post or a put request. And lastly, we need to make sure that we turn the JavaScript object that we're going to be sending to the server into JSON first. So how do we actually include a request body? Well, we're going to do this in a series of challenges here. First of all, let's remember with fetch, we have fetch, and then we supply a URL. Obviously, for the first little bit, this isn't actually going to work as a fetch request because URL is not a valid URL. And you'll remember that fetch, when we don't provide any additional information or options to fetch, it assumes that our request is a GET request. So your first challenge is to change this fetch call to a post request. Again, it's not going to work because URL isn't a valid URL, but it's good practice anyway. Pause here and try to change this into a post request.
Change this. So basically do this. Method. Then we do post. Okie dokie.
Well, all I need to do is add a second parameter to my fetch request, which is an options object. And here I can say I want the method of this fetch request to be a post request. And that needs to be a string. Okay, awesome. Well, this options object, and let me actually pull this onto its own line so it isn't quite so cluttered. This options object has, believe it or not, other options that we can add. And the one that we're most interested in right now is the body. And this is where we would include the body or the data that we want to send off to the server. So with that being said, let me type up the next challenge. We're going to do this challenge in a couple parts. So the first thing I want you to do is to set up this request so you're adding a new to-do item on the JSON placeholder API. I've given you the base URL and the endpoint, and the body object that you send should contain two properties. One will be the title property, which is the string of your to-do item, and the other is a completed property, which will be a Boolean. You could probably just default it to false. Now, don't add the .then blocks yet. We have one more thing that we're going to do before it will work correctly. Pause here and work on this challenge.
Okay, do this. HTTPS to-dos. Just want to copy the to-dos, not the slash. Body object should contain the title property, string, title property. So like a title. So it's going to be like that, title. It's going to be hello. Going to be a string, and then booleans completed, true, right, don't add the then yet, am I right?
And we will add with a title property, and let's just say buy milk. And a completed property, which, like I mentioned, we'll just set as false. Now, the one more thing that we need to do before this will work correctly is change this into JSON. Like we mentioned here, it needs to be JSON before we can send it off. There are some libraries that will automatically change your JavaScript body into JSON for you. With fetch, however, it won't do that automatically for us, so we need to do that manually. Fortunately, it's pretty simple. All we need to do is to use json.stringify and put our object inside there like that. Now, the second part of this challenge should be second nature to you by now. You've done it a million times by now. Let me type it out real quick. Okay, you're just going to add those two .then blocks, parse the response as JSON, and then console log the data. Pause here and do part 2 of this challenge.
This. Okay, so we do .then, then we do respond. Just want to response .json. Okay, .then. Then we do data. Console.log data. Data. Two, 1. 201. That's 201.
All right, well, like I said, should be second nature with the console and run this code. Okay, and you'll notice that all we got back was an object with an ID property of 201. Now, the JSON placeholder API is a little bit funny. It's not actually saving new data. It's not taking my data of this object here and adding it to the main list of to-dos. Instead, it's really just kind of mimicking what would happen if I were to add a post request. Now, if this were the API that I had created or the database that I was maintaining, I would obviously write my server in a way that it would actually add this to-do item and save it forever. In our case, what we got back was an object that says, hey, I added your new to-do and here's the ID of that new item. Sometimes the server would actually respond with the full item. I would see the title, completed, and an ID properties all in my to-do item that I just saved. But again, in this case, it's just kind of mimicking a real server. Awesome work. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult. If it was, ask questions in Discord, practice this, delete everything you saw, try
just
typing
mimicking,
it out again,
guys.
like I always say.
Just mimicking.
And when you're ready, let's keep going forward.
I think I save all of it. Okay, let's go to the header.
The last main component of a request that we need to talk about is the headers. Now, I mentioned in the last screencast that sometimes an API will send back the data along with the ID that we got. Well, the truth is this API will do that. It's still not really adding it to its database or anything, but there's one small problem with what we have going on here, and that is that we are not properly setting our headers. Now, a header is simply extra information, or I like to think of it as meta information about the outgoing request. The headers can include information about the type of authentication that you have going on in this request, or it might include information about the body that you're sending, which is what we're going to do soon. Sometimes it'll show things about the client, like the browser you're using or the environment you're currently in and so forth. What I did was I took a screenshot of the headers that were sent out when I did this request to apis.scrimba.com/JSON placeholder/todos. You can see here that it's got information like the scheme, it's HTTPS, or the path, it's JSON placeholder/todos, or that the method was a post method, and so forth. Now, there's one thing that's a little bit off here, and that is the content type. By default, it's text plain, and it has a character set of UTF-8. And I believe what this is telling the server is that we're sending plain text to the server in the content body. However, that's not actually true. We're sending JSON, not plain text. Now, in an effort to get your hands on the keyboard and get you searching and problem solving, I'm going to do this next challenge in, again, a little unconventional way. Let me type it out real quick. What I want you to do is to copy and paste this URL here. It's just some documentation from the Mozilla Developer Network on using fetch. I even included the ID of the place where you're going to find this answer. I want you to look through that and see if you can figure out how to set the content type header. What's nice about this is the example that they use is using JSON as the content type, so you should just be able to essentially copy what is there. I would like you to type it out just to get some muscle memory involved. And then once you add that header to our fetch request, I want you to check to see what comes back. So pause here and work on this challenge.
Wait, let me go grab coffee. dun, dun, dun. Right, what I need to do? Check this website how to change the content type headers to indicate the JSON in the request body. Alright. Using fetch. So header content type right here. So header go before buy milk content type. There we go. Content type application JSON. Application JSON. Got it.
Well, as we might expect, just like we were able to add a method option to our options object and a body option to our options object, I can add a headers option to our options object. And the headers will be represented by another object. This is not one that we have to JSON.stringify or anything. It's just information about the request that we're passing along to fetch. And inside there, I'm going to have a property called content-type. I believe they need to be capitalized like that. At least that's the strong convention. And for the value, I'm going to use application/JSON. What this is doing is telling the server that I'm sending JSON in the request body here. So be prepared to take that JSON and parse it into JavaScript and do your thing with it. Now, without these headers, let me comment this out and run this again, open the console. You'll see we received in return an object with an ID of 201. Now, if I put this back in and I hit save and run this, not only do I have an ID of 201, but I also have the information in the request body that I sent to the server. What this tells me is that without setting...
Let me check what they have here. Oh, it's just 200,000 ID. So to-do list.
the content type of JSON, the server really didn't know how to handle this request body. But once I told it that I was sending it JSON, it was successfully able to parse the request body from JSON, add it to the database. Again, it's not really doing that, but for practice sake, we're going to say that it's adding it to its database. And then when it returns the object back to me, it gives me the same data that I gave it, plus the ID that the database added to my object. There's a lot of options for headers. For the next while, you probably aren't going to have to deal with them too much beyond what we've done here with content type. I can't promise that 100%, but I personally haven't done a whole lot with headers manually. And so I imagine as you're going through the front-end developer career path here, we're not going to dive super deep into headers. But if nothing else, hopefully they make sense and you understand the language a little better when you hear someone.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Anatolian settlers. What is Anatolian?
Talking about request headers.
Express.js. Yeah, I've never worked with Express.js. Might be a good library to work. But let's move back here.
And now we are poised to continue working on blog space and actually add new blogs to our list of blogs through that form that we created. So let's work on that next.
Blog space. What does Express.js do? It's a backend web application framework for building RESTful API with Node.js. Released as free and open source and the MIT license. Single page, multi-page, and hybrid web application.
All right, it's time to basically combine all of the cool stuff that we've learned until now to send our data to the server. I know I've said it a bunch of times. With the JSON placeholder API, we are sending a post request, but it's not actually going to add our data to their database or anything. This is really just for practice. So your challenge is to send it off to the server. I've given you the base URL, the endpoint, and then kind of was vague about what your method should be and what your request body should be, how you should write your headers and everything. There's some hints in there, and you can always go back and check some of our past casts for a quick reminder if you need it. But really try this out. Don't just wait until I show you how to do it.
Okay, let's try this. Base URL, so fetch. Let's do URL. Boom, that. Okie dokie. And basically what we need to do is also method. Method. Post. Well. And then we need to do another one, right? So we need a body. Body. And then object. Let's go back. Let's save this and then go back. Boom, body, post. So inside the post, inside the method. Right. So inside the method. The body is also inside the method. Okay. Got it.
All right, it's time to basic.
So let's go here. Let's do fetch URL and then post HTTPS. Grab it in here. And this method post, and then we do body. Headif is, let's do headif. So the content type. Mozilla Firefox, what is it? Boom, bow, boom, bow. Headers. Content type. So it's basically an object. Right, content type. And then applications slash JSON. Okay. Don't need a comma. Yes, we do need a commas. So body. Commas. Body. Commas. Right inside here, what we would need is a title. Title is going to be post title. Does it work? And then body. Going to be post body. Let's see it. Save. would I be able to see it? Oh, I need to stringify it. JSON, stringify this, and this, right? Stringify. So I need to stringify this. Is that like that? I'm assuming it's like that. Let's check. Stringified. Right between there. I'm right. Where's my stuff? Let's type it again. URL here. This, and then method. Okay, post. Okay. So the comments, that is. Then we have an object, then comments, then we do content type. Then we do application slash JSON. Body. First of all, we need to JSON, stringify, open, this, and then we do title. What we need to do is this.
Work on this challenge. Where else here? I think just for some variety, and I'll fill it out, but then I'm just going to supply it here as the second parameter. Post request on dot stringify. And this object, actually, we've already defined this object up here as data, so I don't need the curly braces. I'll just say data. And then
what we can do is data.
actually, we've already defined slash JSON. Now, if you did an going to the JSON placeholder documentation or something like that, you might see somebody setting the char set a specific way. I've found that I don't actually need to do that for this to work, but just hoping to acknowledge that that is a thing. You can set the different character set right here inside of content type. So I've built out my options object and I'm supplying it here in fetch. I'm not really going to get any kind of feedback if I just run this, so I better add my .then blocks.
Forgot the .then. why it's not working. But then response rest.json, and then .then data console.log data. Okay. Okay, why is it not working? Cannot run read property of undefined dot. Reading then is a function. So the dot data, that's right. What the hell?
So I better add my .then blocks. I'm gonna take the response and parse the body. Parse the body from it run. I'll say this is a new title, new body, hit post, and awesome. Look, if
Try and redo this. Bounce. Options equal to this. That's it. Copy whole every of this here, and then we just fetch the option. Okay. Not bad.
If we check our console, it looks like we got that back, similar to how we did with the to-dos API earlier. The obvious next step is to
just got too
this
messy.
data that we got back and to actually add it to our list of blog posts here. We're going to do that in the next screencast.
Probably add more than one bracket somewhere.
So we've written the logic that allows us to post a new blog post to the server. Now what we need to do is take the data that comes back and just add it to the DOM. Probably the easy approach would be just to add it to the bottom of our posts here in the list, down here at the bottom. If you want a little bit of an extra challenge, you could try to make it so that it puts the newest post on the top. It's really up to you, but go ahead, pause here, and work on this challenge.
So we console.log data. We have the data. Right. What do we need? We need to shove it into that's console.log first. ID 101. So using the DOM, update the DOM with a new block entry. Let HTML equal let's copy this code. Okay. Boom. Post array is not defined. Post array, post array, post array. So let post array so we have the post array here. Data.push. Post array dot push. Post array push. Push new data into post array. And then we let HTML. Okay. Let post array. Post title. Post array is not defined. Let's do new post. Cons new post. Equal data. How do we do this? I think we need to do something here. For post a post of post array, new post of new post. Then we run a loop. Then we print on. Hmm. Oh, we cannot push it. Slice. Pretty much copy it. Update the DOM with a new block
Well,
entry.
up here, I'm adding my HTML, or I've got my HTML that's allowing me to add this stuff to the DOM. And I'm setting an HTML variable and then adding it all to my inner HTML of my blog list. So this blog list is the div, I think, that's containing all of my blogs. Let me go ahead and grab this. And down below, essentially I'm going to take the inner HTML and then do a plus equals of probably just the same HTML that I was adding.
We can do that. Okay. Wait, just remove everything. Should be plus equal. Boom. Boom. I'll set to the bottom. Do I have any style for that? Form, block list. Maybe we need to reverse it.
Up above here. So let me copy this and then add to it the same HTML that we had been using to add the other blog posts. Let's scroll to the top and just refresh. Now with a blog post, it seems kind of funny to add it to the bottom. So I think I also want to do the challenge of putting it up here toward the top. Now kind of a tricky way that I could do is to just take this inner HTML line that I have here and stick it at the bottom of my document here. And then what I'm going to do, instead of adding to it, I'm just going to get rid of my plus. And essentially what I'm saying is take the inner HTML of the div that contains all my blog posts and set it equal to this new blog post and then all the other blog posts
Why
from
don't we
before.
just
The
display
inner
flex
HTML of all the other blog
then
posts is not yet
column
being
reverse?
overwritten until this operation is complete. And so I still have access to all those other blog posts in this line right here. First, let's just see if this works. I'll hit save. And notice, by the way, before I submit a new one, that my new post is gone. It's not here because the database is really not saving this data anywhere. But we'll say new title, new body, post, and there it is. It showed up there at the top. Now, if you're still fairly new to web development, this might not trigger the same things that it's triggering for me, but this is something that to me is called a code smell, which means that something just feels off. For example, I have this HTML that's being written twice. I've got it up here and I've got it down below where we just added it. And this seems to be working just fine. And for a small project like what we have here, it's probably not going to be a big deal. However, oftentimes you don't know how big the project's going to end up growing. And when you introduce little inconsistencies or pieces of your code that aren't dry or aren't conforming to really a good pattern, sometimes those can get a little bit out of hand as your project grows. For example, if I wanted to add a class to this H3, just call it blah, then all of a sudden I have two places that I need to update this. I would need to add it here, and I would also need to add it here. And who knows, maybe I have 4 or 5 instances where I've copied and pasted this code, now I'm updating it everywhere and it just starts to get out of hand. So in the next screencast, we're going to do a bit of a refactor on how we approached this problem. Doing a refactor like this is completely normal. It's one of the most common things you're going to end up doing as a web developer, assuming you have the bandwidth to actually fix your code instead of kind of leaving it in a poor condition for other people. So when you feel good about what we did here, let's keep moving forward.
You just need to put so many scam callers.
A couple things with our code that are kind of rubbing me the wrong way. The first one, like we talked about, is our duplicated HTML code that we have both here and down here. In a small project like this, it's probably not that big of a deal, but I usually like to tend toward the side of doing things right instead of assuming that this project will never grow and passing it on to other developers who then have to wonder why I didn't make this simpler or more dry. The other thing, though, that's kind of irking me about this code is we've got this operation that runs right when the program loads, and it's doing a lot of things. First of all, it's getting the data, and then obviously it's getting the JSON from the data. Then it's taking the data and it's maintaining the array, and then it's creating some HTML, and then it's updating the DOM. That makes it sound like a lot of things. If you boil it down really though, it's getting data and updating the DOM. And then later on, we're also updating the DOM in the same way, and that's where we get our duplicated code. Another thing is we really only have access to the list of posts that comes back within this function right here. Once this function ends, we no longer have access to our posts array, which is why down here, what we had to do was take everything from the inner HTML and tack it on to the end of our new blog post. So I think what a better approach would be is to have, in this case, a global variable. So let's say posts array. And I'm going to set this equal to an empty array. And by the way, I'm intentionally not doing this first part as a challenge because I kind of thought it might be helpful just to see the way that I go about these refactors. And at a point in this cast, we will do a quick challenge just so you don't tune out quite yet. Then I think what I'll do is when I have access to the data and I slice out just the first 5 items so we don't have 100 items listed there, instead of creating this new variable, I think I'm just going to set my posts array equal to the array that comes back with just the first 5 items. Of course, typing this equal sign is reminding me that I can't use a const here. I'm going to have to use a let if I'm going to be reassigning this variable. And the next thing I think I'm going to do is create a separate function that I'll call render posts, whose entire job is to update the DOM based on what the current state of our posts array is. And that way, each of these fetch requests that I have here and I have down here, all they're going to do is update posts array and then call render posts, and they will delegate the updating of the DOM to my function render posts.
Right,
now, if you have followed my logic up until now and that kind of makes sense, then what I would like you to do is to pause and to actually try implementing this render posts. Refactor what we have, move some of this code into render posts, and then call render posts inside of our other functions. If you're feeling a little lost, you can skip this exercise. You have my permission to skip this one challenge. But if that does make sense, I want you to pause here and to try it out.
Let's see. Basically, we do for loops. Yeah, just basically do this, right? And we shove it into here. And then we just render. Post array is not defined. Okay. And then we remove this. Can we just do a render post? Maybe. How do you do
Well,
it?
I'm going to my render posts method or function up
Basically the
here,
same things.
and then just call render posts.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hit refresh. The funny thing about doing refactors is essentially we'll know that it worked if nothing changes. So let me hit refresh, and oh, yep, we got an error that it posts array. So let me update this, and let's try refreshing again. And there's our posts again. Awesome. That means that the refactor is working. We have this function that is dedicated entirely to taking whatever is in our post array and rendering it to the DOM. You can see our fetch here that runs right when the app loads is much simpler now. Okay, this is where the challenge for everybody lives. Let me type it out really quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so the challenge is to use our brand new render post function and to clean up the code that we have down here. Make sure that when you're doing this, you update the posts array variable first. Pause here and try this.
Update the post array variable first. Use our new render post function to clean up this code. Don't forget to update post array variable first. Post array variable. Use our new render post function to clean up this code. Probably is going to be shoved down here. Function render post. Okay, say undefined. Render post. It's run, but I don't know what to do here. Use our new render post function to clean up this code. Blockless. Post array. post array right here. Post array. Right. Object. So done.
Pause here and try this challenge. Our new post at the top and then taking everything from the DOM from before. What I should be able to do is just update my posts array variable. So we'll say posts array. And since this is an array, if I want to add my new post to the end, I can say simply .put.
Post array push post console.log post array and we have blah blah something. Okay, do use a new render post, and then we run render post, right?
Post, or what's really nice about doing it this way is if I want my new post to show up at the beginning, I have an array method for that, and I can just use unshift. That'll put my new post at the beginning of the posts array. And then when I call render posts, it should just put my new post at the top. Let's refresh.
Oh, why is my thing is not working? Oh, it's down here. Push. Okay. That's good.
Say new title.
Boom.
Post. And awesome. It showed up right at the top. And we did it in just 2 lines of code. I can delete to the beginning and
Reset form.
you may have noticed that in our blog here, when we enter a new title and a new body, we hit post. Everything is working here, but our form is still populated with the old title and body that we just submitted. This should be a pretty quick addition. I figured it would be a good challenge. So your challenge is simply to clear out the form. And actually, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to give you a chance to either implement something that you might already know or do a little bit of research and see if you can figure out a way to make this work. Essentially, when I click the post button, after I render my new blog post down here in the list, my form should then empty so that these fields are ready for the next.
So we basically do this. Value. Basically just clear it, right? Clear form. After submit. contact form, was it? Contact form. Mm, mm, mm. Contact form, name contact form, action. Boom, bow, boom. Cons form equal document. Get element by ID. Here's form. Okay.
Next thing to be entered into them. Pause here and try to clear out the form.
Boom, 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 boom.
Well, there's actually a couple ways that I could do this. The first thing I could do is come up here. Let me grab my elements that have values, my input boxes here. And I could simply say get the post title and access the value, but set it equal to an empty string. And then I could do the exact same thing for the body. Set that equal to an empty string. And let's, I guess, just see how that goes. I'll save this. We'll type in something, hit post. And there we go. Our title and our body inputs have cleared out. One thing that I'm not loving about this right now is, first of all, I'm selecting my element more than one time. You can see we've got our post title that we're accessing up here and our post title that we're accessing down here. And again, this isn't a huge deal in such a small app, but if over in the HTML I decided I wanted to change the ID, then not only would I change it in the HTML, but I would have to come change it in multiple places in my JavaScript. So oftentimes what I'll do when I have a selector is I will just select that element and save it in a global variable. So maybe I'll say title element, or maybe title input equals, and then I will use my selector. And we will do the exact same thing with our body input. And this will be post body. And then anywhere in my code where I was doing that selector kind of on the fly, I can just put title, let's see, title input here and body input here. And then once again down here, I can replace this with title input and body input. Again, this should work. That's just a small refactor. I post a new thing and the form clears out. Now, just for your own knowledge, if any of you were researching how to clear a form in JavaScript, you may have come across the form.reset method. And to be honest, this is usually the solution I end up going with. The only reason I didn't do it here is because currently, as I'm recording this, the Scrimba editor doesn't actually support form.reset. So it will work when I record this, but when you watch it, it won't look like anything cleared out. But just for the sake of completion, what essentially that looks like is to say, maybe I could say form. I'll select my form. That's my element with the ID of new post, just like we did up here. And then I can replace this event listener with form. But more importantly, what I could alternatively do instead of clearing out each of the individual inputs is just say form.reset. This is especially useful if you have a lot of inputs that you need to clear on your form. You don't necessarily want to select them each individually. If you pause the screencast and actually run this code yourself, you'll see that it works just fine. It's only in the playback on Scrimba that it doesn't quite work yet. So for now, I'm going to leave this as a comment just to know that it's there, and I will leave these here because that's what will work here. Awesome work. Hopefully you either already knew the answer to that or were able to do some good research and figure out a good solution on your own. Now, at this point, we're actually pretty done with our blog space app. Everything is working the way that we originally intended. However, we do have a couple more topics that we need to cover before we move on from this section. Before we end this section, we will come back to this code and revisit it, sort of as a reminder
grab
to
that
see
coffee.
exactly what we wrote. Before we move on to the next section, feel free to take some time now to revisit the code that we have written here, especially if you had to split these lessons over a few different days. It can be a really good way to remind yourself exactly how far you've come. And then when you're ready, let's continue onward and keep learning. Over the next couple of screencasts, we are going to be talking about
REST API?
Now, what exactly is REST? It stands for Representational State Transfer.
Yeah.
However, this is just another one of those 4-letter acronyms that will probably make you more confused. However, if you've done any kind of job searching lately, you've likely come across the term REST or RESTful API, REST API, something along those lines. So although representational state
Why the coffee smell like
transfer might be kind of a confusing term, the principle behind REST is actually not that difficult.
Smells
I prefer
smoky.
to think of it as a design pattern which provides a standard way for clients and servers to communicate with each other. When we talked about HTTP being the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, it's a very similar thing. The
design
protocol
pattern
is a
provide a
standardized
standard
way
way for
for the
clients.
communication to happen. And REST is simply the same thing. It's a set of principles that, if adhered to, allow for a standard way for clients, like your computer, and servers to communicate with each other. We're going to be talking about a few principles of REST, and the first one we're going to talk about is the separation of client and server. We've covered the basics of how a client and server interact, but we've done so assuming that we are adhering to the principles of REST. So let's see what might happen if we did not adhere to those principles. On the left, we have our client, and on the right, we have our server. In this case, our client we're referring to is a computer. And on that computer, you might open up a browser and navigate to a website like weather.com. Now, one potential way for a website to be coded is so that when an incoming request to weather.com happens, the server will build the HTML page with the data embedded in it, and then send the entire thing back to the client to display to the user. This is a process called server-side rendering. It's actually pretty common, and it will work for a lot of clients, anything that uses a browser like a laptop or even a tablet or a phone. And that's assuming that we're talking about using the mobile browsers in those devices. However, if you're using an app or you have a device such as a smartwatch, which maybe doesn't have a browser or at least isn't a great experience to use the browser in, that smartwatch may also want to get data in the form of JSON from weather.com. And if we didn't have a RESTful API or a RESTful server that knew how to send JSON data back alone, it would be a little bit confused because the smartwatch can't take an HTML page and render it, again, assuming we're using the native app and not some kind of mobile browser. And so this might just cause confusion. Now, in a RESTful setup, what would happen instead is the client would request JSON data from the server, and the server would respond with that JSON data. And in this setup, the server, which is just sending JSON data back, doesn't really care how that JSON data gets used. If the client making the request is doing so from a browser, then it will take the JSON data and on its own, within its own system, insert that data into its web page, instead of relying on the server to render that HTML page with the data and send it all together in one big bundle. In this case, the client simply says, just give me the data. I will deal with rendering that data so that the user can make sense of it. What's really useful in the setup is that the server just doesn't care how the client displays that data. So if the server is set up as a RESTful API or a RESTful server, it means that even a smartwatch could do the exact same thing. It would just get weather data or request weather data in the form of JSON. And once again, the server would say, okay, here you go. And then it's up to the app in the smartwatch to make sense of that data and to actually display it on the app in a way that makes sense to the user. All right, with that being said, let me type up a quick quiz for you. Okay, I've come up with a couple questions. Read through them, type down your answers, and we'll go through them together. Pause now and work on the quiz. Okay, so how would you understand what's happening with the server, but the point is kind of the same. And you'll notice again that this is similar to our definition of a protocol. Now, what does a RESTful API usually return in response to incoming requests? Well, because it's RESTful, the server isn't in charge of figuring out how to display the data. And so these days, the most common format for data is JSON, and your RESTful API will pretty much always be returning JSON data. And what kind of client devices can make use of a RESTful API? Well, maybe this was a little bit of a trick question because it's kind of all of them. Pretty much anything that's connected to the internet is going to be making use of RESTful APIs and have the ability to receive JSON data and turn that into something visible to the user. I'm not just talking about laptops, tablets, and mobile devices, but even things like smart refrigerators, washers and dryers, light bulbs, pretty
Would be
much
so
anything that's
OP.
connected.
What if I can code like interface for all of them? Like fridge, like do something like that people never do. Like watch, fridge. They have like a car monitors. That would be so OP.
To the internet these days can
Like nobody actually apply for that job. So if you know how to do that, probably you're like you probably like within like 100 people who know how to do this. Maybe other language, you probably like you would be able to do it with other language, like Flutter or Dash. I mean, or app, maybe app language. Maybe you would
make
be able
use
to do
of a
that.
RESTful API. There's a few more principles of REST that we need to cover, so let's start doing those in the next screencast. So we've talked about client and server separation. The next principle that we're honestly just going to touch on briefly is the concept of statelessness. In reality, I started building a bunch of slides and examples to describe statelessness, and then I realized that I could probably just teach enough for you to get the concept right now and not worry about the nitty-gritty details of statelessness. Simply said, the concept of statelessness means that when the client makes a request to a server, the server doesn't maintain any memory of that request. So when a request is sent to the server fulfills that request if it can and sends back a response, and then essentially forgets everything about that request and the client that made that request. If for some reason the client needs the server to know more information, it will need to send that every single time it makes a request. It's oftentimes called session state, and like I said, it's not something you'll need to dive super deep into, but it is an important principle of REST, and it will come into play later when we talk more about authentication. But what I'm really excited to teach here is the concept of RESTful API design. And by its nature, the next principle of REST is that essentially what we're doing is accessing resources. That's basically the entire interaction between client and server, is the client asking the server to send it some sort of resource. And so one of the biggest benefits that you'll see with RESTful API design is a standardized way to set up URL endpoints so that it's very easy for a developer to understand an API and understand what should be coming back from a certain API request. The best way to show this is with some examples. And so we're going to use a fictional bicycle shop API called Mike's Bikes, and this is the base.
What if I can create like a API business? How to create an API? That would be so OP. That would be so good.
Base URL that you can assume is at the beginning of each one of these requests. So let's imagine that this bicycle shop has one of its main endpoints, which is /bikes. The /bikes endpoint will likely support a couple different methods. /bikes available on post request. Bikes represents a resource that is a collection of bikes. A post request to /bikes would mean that I want to add a new bike to the collection of bikes. This would probably only make sense from, say, an admin of mikesbikes.com. I probably wouldn't want any old user to be able to add new bikes to the list of bikes that are being sold on this website. Now, with RESTful API design, it goes even deeper than this, and that is when you include an ID to your API endpoint. And endpoints like this are another key component of RESTful API design. So we have /bikes/ and then you'll see I have a :ID. Whenever you see something like a :ID as a part of your URL, it's not the literal text :ID, but instead is a placeholder for the ID of one specific bike in the collection of bikes. So for example, I might have the endpoint be /bikes/123, where 123 represents the ID of one of the specific bikes in my collection of bikes. Some methods that would make sense with an endpoint such as bikes/bikes/the ID, like /bike/123, might be a GET request. Think for a second, what would this GET request mean that is different than a GET request to just /bikes? If you said that a GET request to /bike/123 would get me information about just that one bike, then you're right. Whereas a GET request to /bikes would get me an array of probably objects in JSON. A GET request to /bike/123 probably wouldn't return an array, but instead just an object that represented that one specific bike. Another method that would make sense with this is a put request. Remember, a put request is when we are updating a resource. In this case, a put request makes most sense with an ID attached to the URL because we are likely wanting to update a single bike. Let's say, for example, the bike with the ID of 123 increases in price by $50. Well, a put request, probably again by an administrator of mikesbikes.com, would make it so that I could update this one specific bike by providing a new price at which it's being sold. And similarly, a delete request will most often include the ID of the resource that you're trying to delete. Semantically, a delete request to /bikes alone would mean that you're trying to delete the entire collection of bikes, which intuitively feels a little bit dangerous. You probably wouldn't want to create an API endpoint that allowed anyone to do that, even if they are Mike himself. Instead, a delete request will almost always include an ID that's required for you to delete just one of the resources. Something to point out here is that our API endpoints only include nouns and, in this case, IDs as well. Good API design will not include things like verbs as a part of your API endpoint. You might still see something like get-bikes as its own endpoint. And nowadays, that's actually just kind of poor REST API design. Your API endpoint should only include the noun of the resource that you're interacting with. And that's because we already have
call REST for a reason. Because it's resting. So no, it's not doing anything. It's not doing anything.
Have a way to indicate what kind of method or action we're hoping to take, and that's the request method. That's where our verbs essentially live. Whether we're getting, posting, putting, or deleting, we have that information in the request method, and really it doesn't belong inside of the URL itself. Now, for quite a while, you are just going to be the consumer of these APIs. You aren't necessarily going to be the one designing these APIs. So the principles that we just talked about are meant to help you as the developer of the client side or the front end application. And then when the time comes for you to start developing more on the back end, you'll have a better sense of what it means to develop an API and what some of those good practices with creating a RESTful API include. Okay, that's enough lecture. Let's get to a quiz to hopefully solidify some of this information that we've learned. Everything's typed up here. Pause the screencast now and start answering the questions in the quiz. And I'd like you to actually click in here and type down the answer. That's really the benefit of Scrimba here. So pause now and work on the quiz. For a server to be stateless, it kind of just means that it forgets the interaction after the response is sent. Or you could have said something like it doesn't remember anything about the client's previous requests or something along those lines. No, I didn't do the rest. We are going to touch on a couple more topics regarding this in the next couple lessons. So when you feel good about what we've learned here, let's keep moving forward.
Okay, I think I will stop the stream here. I will come back, maybe study, maybe do some project, continue with our hype trackers, hype finders, and then we go into our colors. I haven't done anything with it, just the layout. Alright.